Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to the 13th day of 2 weeks of Elizabeth Gaskell. We are nearing the end, and today I'm going to be talking about my second favourite Elizabeth Gaskell novel, and that is her wonderful Wives and Daughters. Chapter 1. The Dawn of a Gala Day. To begin with the old rigmarole of childhood. In a country there was a shire, and in that shire there was a town, and in that town there was a house, and in that house there was a room, and in that room there was a bed, and in that bed there lay a little girl, wide awake and longing to get up, but not daring to do so for fear of a certain unseen power in the next room, a certain Betty, whose slumbers must not be disturbed until 6 o'clock struck, when she wakened of herself as sure as the clock, and left the household very little peace afterwards. It was a June morning, and early as it was, the room was full of sunny warmth and light. So Wives and Daughters was Elizabeth Gaskell's final novel. It was first published in 1866, just a few months after her death, and she actually died without quite completing it. So it is an unfinished novel, but an unfinished novel in the most, gruelling way. But Elizabeth Gaskell died so near the ending that it's very, very clear what's about to happen, but she probably had 5 pages left to write, and those 5 pages would have been brilliant! And I'm so sad that she died without finishing it, because it's so close, it's so close. But despite that, it is an incredible, incredible book. I should say, before I begin talking about what Wives and Daughters is about, and what I love about it, that I have been rereading Wives and Daughters over the last month, and I literally finished listening to the audiobook yesterday. So I'm still on a Wives and Daughters high, and I might get quite excited over the course of this video because Wives and Daughters is really, really incredible. One of the best books ever written, ever, just ever. I first read Wives and Daughters when I was about 15, I think, and until this month I hadn't read it for, I would say, about 9 years, and I had forgotten quite how amazing it was. Earlier on in the year, when I decided I was going to do a Gaskell week, I wrote down my list of my favourite Gaskell novels in order, and Wives and Daughters was down at number 5 or 6, and then I started rereading it, and it started to creep up until it ended up getting to number 2, and is nearly joint favourite with tomorrow's book. I can't believe I'd forgotten how amazing it was. I've had to rethink my list of top 10 novels all time. I may even have to rethink my top 5. That's how good this book is. That's how good this book is. But anyway, what is Wives and Daughters about? Wives and Daughters follows the story of a young woman called Molly, who at the beginning of the book is about 16, 17. Molly's mother died when she was quite young, and she lives with her father, who is the doctor in a small town of Hollingford, which is somewhere in the Midlands. She and her father have a very close relationship. They love each other very, very much. They get on incredibly well. And then one day, when she is nearly 17, one of the apprentice doctors to her father decides that he is desperately in love with Molly Gibson and tries to send her a letter, which her father intercepts and is shocked by, amazed by, because he kind of hadn't realised that his daughter was growing up. He doesn't quite know what to do because he has this apprentice doctor who is living in the same house as his daughter and seems to be desperately in love with his daughter. So he sends his daughter Molly away to some friends of his, a family called the Hamleys, who are the squires of a village nearby. Squire Hamley lives with his wife and also his 2 sons, Roger and Osborne. Molly goes to stay with them, becomes very, very good friends with Mrs. Hamley, and also gets to know the 2 sons. And while Molly is staying away at Hamley Hall, Mr. Gibson decides that he might need to take some more serious steps in order to look after his poor motherless girl who might not be getting the right female attention that she needs as she is becoming a woman. And so he decides that it's maybe time that he thinks about getting remarried. And the book all goes on from there. It follows the character of Molly, her relationship with her father, her relationship with her stepmother, and also her relationship with her stepsister Cynthia. The book follows the new family setup and also Molly's continual relationships and friendships with the Hamley family and the 2 sons Osborne and Roger, and it is just one of the best books ever written, and I can't believe I had forgotten how amazing it was. So to talk about all the things that I love about Wives and Daughters, and firstly I think it is a brilliant exploration of the small town in the 19th century. It's actually not set in the Victorian period, it's set a little bit before. I think that it's set between 1828 and 1831, if I remember correctly, but it examines the small town of Hollingford and the surrounding county families in a really, really interesting way. One thing I quite like about it is that it juxtaposes and explores the kind of conflict between the county families, the wealthy families who own a lot of land nearby, and the townspeople who, even if they are gentlefolk and respectable and gentlemen and ladies, are not quite so fine nor so important nor quite so wealthy nor have quite such good blood as the people in the big houses who live around the town of Hollingford. Molly, as the daughter of a country doctor, as the daughter of a surgeon, is very thoroughly middle class, but she interacts with a lot of characters who are in the upper classes. And the book is a really interesting look at middle class behaviour and often middle class anxieties. Mrs. Gibson, Molly's stepmother, used to be a governess at a nearby local house called the Towers, where she was governess to the daughters of the Earl and the Countess, and so she has lived in places that are much grander than where she now lives, and she always kind of wants to be more upper class than she is and likes to try and make her family more upper class and less middle class. She's really concerned about what might be vulgar and coarse, such as cheese, for example. Apparently cheese was vulgar in the 1830s, but anyway. And there's a lot of brilliant details in this book that tell you so much about the middle classes at that time and about class relationships and kind of class anxieties as well, which is something I love about it. And I think the small town setting is really, really interesting there as well. I also think Wives and Daughters is a brilliant examination of family and of family difficulties. We get this very, very close relationship depicted between Molly and her father, which is so well done, but we also get the odd relationship between Molly and her stepsister, who she's very close to, but also at times has a strained relationship with, and her stepmother, who is a fascinating character, as I'll talk about in a minute, but she doesn't always have the best relationship with. She doesn't really get on with that well. I also think that the family at Hamley Hall, the squire, his wife, and the two sons is a brilliantly depicted family. I love the relationships between them, and I think that they are done so perfectly and so well. The afterword of the audiobook of Wives and Daughters I was just listening to wrote really wonderfully about how Roger and Osborne are two brothers who are incredibly different but also alike, in that you can see the similarities between them and you can see in their personalities that they're brothers, but also the differences between them in a way that is really, really clever and really well done. I've already touched on the relationship between Molly and her father, Mr. Gibson, but another sort of almost father-daughter relationship I love is the relationship between Molly and Squire Hamley, who looks upon her as a surrogate daughter through a lot of the book, and their relationship and his fondness for Molly, his true utter fondness and reliance on Molly, is so beautiful and so wonderful and so nicely explored. There are so many important and interesting themes discussed in Wives and Daughters about family, about class, about gender, about the position of women in society, about morality and truthfulness, about whether it is better to appear good or to be good and the difference between these things. I also think that the theme of grief and death is at its best here. Elizabeth Gaskell writes brilliantly about grief, like better than anyone, better perhaps even than Banana Yoshimoto, and that's saying something. Some of the bits in this book about grief and death are like some of the best things that Elizabeth Gaskell has ever written and that have ever been written. I think the characterisation in Wives and Daughters is at its best and perhaps it is most subtle of all of Gaskell. I was thinking about this a lot on my reread because I think I was picking up a lot of things that I didn't necessarily before. I think Molly Gibson as a heroine is such a brilliant character. At times she may seem a little bit passive, but there are also moments where she really takes events into her own hands and where she also acts really strongly and where she also speaks up against things that she thinks are wrong. Despite the fact that she is quite reserved in general, she also does have her father's wit and sarcasm. Gaskell does such a good job of getting us to know Molly so well, so that we know all of Molly's feelings without being told them in the most effective way. I think she's a brilliant character to follow and I really, really love her very, very much. She has her failings and she has her faults, but these are explored so wonderfully, as well as the true goodness and kindness in her. I love her father, Mr. Gibson. He's very sarcastic, very witty, but also very strong and loves Molly very deeply. And I also really love their relationship because sometimes he shows his affection through sarcasm and that is just really, really enjoyable. I think that Mrs. Gibson and her daughter Cynthia are two of Elizabeth Gaskell's best characters. Not that I like them the most and I want to like have dinner with them the most, but they are brilliant creations because Mrs. Gibson for a lot of the book is dislikable, and yet there are parts of her, there are elements within her that you do like and that you do sympathise with and that you do understand. And despite how sometimes she is a bit mean to Molly, there are also moments where she is really kind to Molly and where you can understand her affection for Molly and that she does have it somewhere in her. She is a very imperfect person, she has made a lot of mistakes in her life and sometimes she says and does things that are horrible, but at the same time you do understand and you do kind of warm to her at moments because she is a very, very complicated character. And her daughter Cynthia is kind of the opposite in that for the most part you really like her, there is a lot about her that is engaging, but actually under the surface there are things that are less pleasant, and there are moments where you can't quite tell if her kindness is kindness or an act of kindness because she is so concerned about her appearance and what people think of her. It's interesting in a way reading this time in comparison to my reading when I was like 15 years old. I think I liked Cynthia less, but I appreciated the skill of what Gaskell does with her more because she is such a complicated complex, multifaceted character. And the way Gaskell paints this young woman is brilliant. Many of the minor characters in Hollingford and at the Towers are wonderful. The Miss Brownings are really believable and engaging characters, and Lady Harriet up at the Towers and Lady Cumnor, her mother, are two of my favourites in Gaskell for their wit, but also in Lady Harriet, her true kindness despite her sometimes snobbery. And then there are the characters up at Hamley Hall. I think Osborne is wonderfully done. I love Roger so much. I think Roger is a brilliant, brilliant character, and I love his plot trajectory as well, and how interested he is in science and the natural world, because that's something you don't hear about much in Victorian literature, and the kind of way his career goes is quite an interesting profession choice and quite unusual in a Victorian novel, so I really like that. I think Mrs. Hamley is a wonderful character, and some of the scenes between her and Molly are the most touching and lovely in Gaskell, and like, forget everything else in this book. Mrs. Hamley and Squire Hamley, that is the love story here. Squire Hamley is one of my favourite characters in all of Gaskell. Some of his dialogue just moves me to tears, and the thing I love about Squire Hamley, and why I think Gaskell does such impressive things in this novel with really complicated characters, is that I love him so much, despite the fact that there are lots of things about that character that I shouldn't like. She does, in a way, with Squire Hamley, a more complex version of what she does with Lady Ludlow in My Lady Ludlow. He has a lot of backward and conservative opinions. He like really hates the French for kind of no reason. He has a lot of prejudices, and he can at times have temper and be quite cruel. But at the same time, he loves so deeply, and he is so kind in his heart that you just like warm to him so much over the course of the book. I think he is one of Gaskell's best creations, because even though some of the things he says and does are unpleasant and he has his faults, you also understand and love him like so much and see the goodness in him, and that is what Gaskell does so well. And I also just have to say that I think in Wives and Daughters, Elizabeth Gaskell's writing is at its absolute best. My favourite Gaskell novel that I'll be talking about tomorrow I love more dearly than Wives and Daughters, but on my rereading of Wives and Daughters this time, I did kind of wonder if perhaps objectively Wives and Daughters is the better book. Much as I love Tomorrow's Novel very, very much, and much as I think Tomorrow's Novel is like one of the greatest things ever written and incredibly written, I do think that the writing in Wives and Daughters is so subtle and brilliant and crafted and amazing. I don't know if it's just because I listen to it on audiobook as well, and I think when I listen to something on audiobook, because I'm reading it slower, I sometimes pick up on like sentences and lines, and I sometimes focus more on the language, and I just kept noting how many amazing lines and what brilliant, beautiful and so subtle. Gaskell's writing in Wives and Daughters is so subtly clever, because we get so many things without her telling us them, and that is what I love about Wives and Daughters. It's so clever. It's a beautiful love story, but it's also a story about family and complex family relationships, and about the way that small towns operate, and about the way that family units operate, and about Molly Gibson growing up and coming of age, and about grief, and about like, oh, so many things. It's really, really good, and like I can't stress enough how this book is really, really amazing. Like really, really, really amazing. On a side note, I would also highly recommend the TV adaptation from I think 1999, which is very, very good and adapts the book really, really well. Also because the book is unfinished and like missed off like 5 to 10 pages at the end, it's quite satisfying to watch the television adaptation, which obviously like finishes it with the closing scene that you're kind of longing for in the book. But as you can tell, I'm rather fond of Wives and Daughters, and also like really, really excited because, as I said, I just literally finished it. Probably been my second favourite read of the year after the book I'll be talking about tomorrow. This year has very much been a year of Gaskell, and it was an utter delight to rediscover this book. It is wonderful. I cannot stress enough how everyone should go and read Wives and Daughters like now, because it's great. Thank you very much for watching. Please let me know down in the comments if you have read Wives and Daughters and what you thought of it, and I'll be back tomorrow to talk about my favourite Elizabeth Gaskell book, and we'll see if I can get any more excited than I am today. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.